So by now, everybody knows the Richard Sherman story. He's a football player for the Seahawks, and I don't want to give you the whole story, but when they beat the Niners, he gave a passionate post-game interview where he called out another player, and he seemingly scared Aaron Andrews, and it was a brief interview. Well, America lost it. They weren't ready for Richard Sherman, and for the life of me, I really couldn't figure out why this was a big deal, which is why I didn't cover the story when everybody else was covering the story. Because I'm like, where's the angle to I don't understand what's interesting about this. Well, a lot of people thought that this guy it was a gangster and a thug, and he's this rowdy black guy. And I was thinking the entire time, man, look, I don't know how you can judge a person's character based on, what was it, a little soundbite in a post-game interview when he's very passionate after what's probably the height of his life at that point. It just doesn't make any sense. Well, now we have this interview, which really shuts up the critics.
Hey, Richard, of all the backlash, the word thug, does that bother you more than any?
The only reason it bothers me is because it seems like it's the accepted way of calling somebody the N-word nowadays. You know, it's like everybody else said the N-word, and then they say thug, and they're like, oh, that's fine. And that's where it's kind of, you know, it kind of takes me aback, and it's kind of disappointing because they know what's the definition of a thug really. You know, can a guy on a football field just talking to people, you know, maybe I'm talking loudly and doing something, you know, talking like I'm not supposed to, but I'm not, you know, there was a hockey game where they didn't even play hockey. They just threw the puck aside and started fighting. I saw that and I said, oh man, I'm the thug? What's going on here? Jeez. So I'm really disappointed in being called a thug.
How did the humble beginnings that you spoke of, how did that shape and influence the way that you play?
Well, it really gave me a great base to understand that when you're doing something, when you're going out there and playing the game and doing that you came from, you didn't come from anything. You know, where you came from, not a lot of people eat every night. People don't eat every night. There's crime out there. Kids who were born into impoverished situations didn't choose those lives. They didn't choose that. So you really take every moment and every play, and you understand that it has great magnitude and it means a lot, and you really take nothing for granted. You take no play, no blade of grass, no nothing for granted, and you go out there and play with all your heart.
Richard, coming from where you come from, when people say the word thug, does that sort of hit the button for you?
It does sometimes, because I know some thugs, and they know I'm far the furthest thing from a thug. And, you know, it's just, you coming from where I've thought that my whole life, just coming from where I'm coming from. You know, just because you hear Compton, you hear Watts, you hear cities like that, you just think thug. He's a gangster. He's this, that, and the other. And then you hear Stanford, and they're like, oh man, that doesn't even make sense. That's an oxymoron. And you fight it for so long, and to have it, you know, come back up and people start to use it again is really, it's frustrating.
That dude's intelligence runs circles around every single one of his idiotic critics that just immediately jumped to conclusions and acted like he's this low-life asshole thug prick who belongs in the hood somewhere. I mean, that is such a great point about hockey. I know what he's talking about. I've seen the clips, right? Where they, you know, they go to do the face-off, and then boom, immediately they drop the puck, everybody just throws the sticks to the side, and they go to work. They start fighting each other. Could you imagine if in the NBA or in the NFL, you had all the black people, because those sports are majority African-American, all that, they started fighting immediately, like they do in hockey? People would immediately jump to racial stereotypes and go, typical. Look at all these thugs and criminals acting like they're like gangsters, right? But with hockey, I never hear any older white person malign, you know, the quality of human being that is a hockey player. I only hear it about people in the NFL and people in the NBA. I mean, again, it's an amazing point. It's such a great point, man. I can't get over how good of a point that is. And you know where else we see that? With music. Because I've come out on this show before. I've gotten into heated discussions with people who are fans of the show, where I oftentimes I defend rappers. I defend people who come up with oftentimes very grotesque lyrics and things that glorify the type of life that has sex and drugs and all this nonsense. And the argument I use is, for Christ's sake, if you're gonna dislike that and talk against that, you have to come with all the facts, and you have to look at the total picture. And the reality is, I came on the show one time and read a list of like 15 songs, all made by white people in rock groups, where they talk about using alcohol endlessly, taking LSD endlessly, heroin use, cocaine use, having sex with hookers. I read the lyrics. I know what it says. Glorifying violence in some songs, glorifying suicide. The fucking Papa Roach song, "Cut My Life into pieces," and with the fucking slit your wrist, all that garbage. But okay, so if you're gonna be angry at rap for the bad things they push and it might affect society in a bad way, okay, you prissy fuck, say the same thing about the white people when they're doing it in rock songs, but you don't do that. Gee, I wonder why that is. What's the defining difference? What's the main characteristic difference between black people and between people in that scenario? One group happens to be black, the other one happens to be white. I don't see anything else that's different. And you see the same thing in sports, you see the same thing, in music, you see it in other areas of life as well. And it drives me crazy because it's a new kind of racism. You know how Bill Maher said a while back that reverse racism is the new racism? People who deny that racism exists is the new racism. That's certainly true. But another form of racism is the subtle racism. The point that he just made, that a new way of calling somebody the N-word is calling them a thug. And you got to be aware of this stuff. And the reality is, a lot of people who don't even think they're racist, they have racist tendencies. It's just inherent assumptions that you have about people who aren't exactly like you. And so you give people who look like you and are part of your tribe, you give them a pass. You grandfather them in. You look the other way when they do something that might be questionable. But if somebody who doesn't look like you immediately let that define their entire character. That is racism in the year 2014, and Sherman is exactly right about it.